Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mythic Bloodmaul Slag Mines. My name is Tuskeh, and in this video we are going to go over the Bloodmaul Slag Mines on its Mythic difficulty, discussing what's changed, what hasn't, and offering suggestions for improvement during the public testing process. Before we begin, it's important to note that the content you are about to see is work in progress, and anything can change before this hits live servers. Now, let's get started. So this first trash pack is fairly easy. It's important to note that these actual enforcers, when they do this crash ability, it actually hits very hard. It took off most of the health of anyone that wasn't a tank, and the tank that we had was actually really well geared and very skilled. So this might actually pose a little bit of a problem if you've got a weak tank and if you've got people standing in the wrong place, and that's good. That's very mythic. I like that. So I think that it's a very good introduction to the instance, and there should be more of these little enforcers wandering around. Now, this next trash pack with the Overseer and the Slaves is kind of exactly like it is on Heroic. It didn't really feel different in any kind of way, which I suppose is okay. And we had some pretty good synergy with the Mass Death Grip and the different Dispels and the Interrupts and the Stuns. And it wasn't really a problem in any kind of way, so not too big of a deal here. I think that's just fine. Moving on, you've got some more Slavers and an Enforcer, and the damage here can get pretty high. They do put a couple of dots on the group, and it can start hurting, and as a healer I felt like I was always doing something, and I always had, people to heal, and there were always things going on around me, which was good, especially when people got hit by the crushes, which didn't quite kill them. I would actually prefer if it killed them, maybe introducing some kind of mechanic that makes it so that if the tank isn't using active mitigation, then maybe they take extra damage, and of course because other people don't have active mitigation, they'll probably just get flat out killed, which, I think is fair. I mean, it's mythic, so those kind of mechanics should exist if this is going to be some kind of progress. Now, this next trash pack is okay. We didn't really have too many problems here. There's a lot of casting going on, but none of it really felt massive. The only real things that turned out to be a problem with this right here, the silence pools that appeared, the Overseers, I believe, casted those, and that wasn't really too much of a big deal. I never felt like the tank was in danger, especially with the Death Knight tank who has a lot of self-heals, so I didn't really feel like that was ever a problem. I would like to see the Geomonsters maybe do something a little bit more, because they don't really tend to do too much. They have the Stone Bolt and then the Shield, but it's not massive, and they're not nearly as important as the Overseers are. So next up, you've got one of my favourite and most deadly mobs in the entire instance, the Bloodmaul Warder. Now, these guys, they hit fairly hard, they have a cleave attack, and most importantly, they have this frightening roar, which is about a 3-second cast time, and if it's not interrupted, then it fears everyone in about 30, maybe more like 20, 15 yards, for about 3 seconds. And it's not a fear that breaks upon taking damage, so you can get, it's basically a stun, and it can be really nasty in some of the later groups. So I like that that's there, and I think that, I'm not really sure how they could do more of it with Mythic, but the trash isn't so much of a big deal. Now, as we move towards Slave Watcher Crushto, as you see the tank here actually ends up pulling him as well as the group, there are a couple of things I'd like to actually see with this guy. So first of all, you see I'm getting feared there, so it actually gets fairly dicey, but not too much of a big deal here. I just focus on the tank and then start getting everyone up. But I'd like to actually see some new mechanics in these Mythic modes. And I've got a few notes here about what I think would make these fights more interesting, because unfortunately right now, all of these Mythic dungeons don't really have any new mechanics. I've done them all, and only one of them had any kind of new mechanic in them, which was a real shame. And I think by adding new mechanics, Blizzard can really make these dungeons a place that people are going to want to go back to, even if they overgear it, just to see what kind of new stuff the bosses do. It doesn't have to be anything massive, it just has to be something different, that's all, because right now, it's just increased numbers for the most part, which is a bit of a shame. So for Slave Watcher Crushto, I'd love to see his crush ability, his Earth Crush, where he fires that long stun out in front of him. Maybe, first of all, make it do a bit of group damage, and second of all, maybe he can cast it 2 or 3 times in a row, and kind of like a pattern, so he can target in one direction, then kind of go to the left a little bit, then another one to the left a little bit, and each time does a bit of raid damage and stuns. And most importantly, I think it would be cool if when the Slave Watcher actually did, say, his Wild Slam or something, he actually summoned one of those Ogre Wardens. Maybe it doesn't have as much health as the ones in the trash packs, but with the same mechanics. That would actually, I think, spice up the fight a lot, because you'd have to deal with that ad as it tries to fear you and deals damage to the tank and all that, on top of the miners that you have to deal with as well. So I think that would be pretty cool. So moving on here, we have a fairly simple trash pack with the Bloodmaul Slavers and I believe a Warder or an Enforcer. I'm not entirely sure. I can't quite see. But no, it's an Enforcer because I see the crush there, so that's all good. But one interesting thing about this is this pig creature here. It does a frontal kind of cone where it kind of swipes. And our Enhancement Shaman got hit by it and instantly killed. it was just instant unavoidable death, which was fantastic. That's very mythic, and I really like that. I would, however, like to see a little bit more kind of an animation, maybe seeing exactly where the danger zone is, because he did just kind of explode. Nasha just annihilated him there. So moving on to the next trash pack, this is Slagna, and she's fairly simple. All she does is this lava spit, which actually, as you can see here, whenever it targets me, it has a travel time, so I'm just avoiding it for the most part. And I get targeted a few times in a row, and I can't really do much, but there's not really much to do here as a healer. I'd like to see some more interesting mechanics on her, maybe some kind of fiery breath attack that leaves something on the ground, but as it stands right now, she's pretty easy. Up next are a few Bloodmaul Slavers, and then you move on to the rather nasty trash packs leading towards the second boss. Now, this, we didn't really have that much trouble here, although I think the tank knew a lot of what he was doing, and it is important to note that I'm fairly skilled as a healer, and the tank was also pretty skilled, so we didn't really have too many problems here. So that may factor in as to how difficult these trash packs are. The mechanics here really didn't do too much, it was just a lot of healing. I didn't really use too many cooldowns here as we moved towards the second boss, and it was all just fairly easy. I'm not entirely sure what I'd like to see here in terms of mythic difficulty. Maybe something that the mini-boss, the magma elemental, does in terms of maybe leaving some stuff on the ground other than those little pillars that don't really seem to do too much. Maybe some fire that spreads or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. And then we move on to the nastiest trash pack in the instance, which has that one water in it, which needs to be interrupted. Now, I'm pretty happy with how this trash pack feels. It's very dangerous, and if you don't interrupt or tremor totem, as I did, that fear from the water, it can be really dangerous, so you have to be kind of careful here. But I think that trash pack is just fine. Now on to Forgemaster Gog'ethh and Magmalatus. Now, this fight was fairly bursty. I felt that there was a lot of damage that just kind of came out of nowhere. There's a lot of stuff on the ground that just kind of can take you by surprise and deal a lot of damage, which was fine. I think that I was forced to think on my feet a little bit and use my cooldowns to keep the group alive. And there are a lot of good mechanics that you can see. You have to move out of, like, Ruination's Slag Smash, and you have to interrupt Calamity's Firestorm, you have to Dispel, and when Magmalatus comes out, you have to avoid his big smash as well. But other than that, I think this is fine. If I were going to add anything to this fight, I would actually take advantage of the lava pools around this kind of circular area. They're not really being used in this fight at all, and I think it would be cool if maybe Magmalatus, once he was freed, like overcharged the magma and maybe caused like a fire line to go from one side of the room to the other, and you have to move through the gap, kind of Sartharian style. If you remember back in Wrath of the Lich King Sartharian, you had a wall of fire coming and you had to identify the gap and move through it. I think that would be cool on top of everything else, a kind of a little challenge to add on top of all of the other things you have to do here. That's what I would add. Other than that, I think this fight's good. There's a lot of damage going out, it's pretty intense, and I enjoyed it. So once that's all over, we return to the bridge that contains the next boss, Rolar, but before we go there, we have one final trash pack to do, and this is a pretty nasty trash pack. Good bit of CC here will help, but there wasn't really too much to worry about in terms of this. It's just you have to keep an eye on the waters, make sure you interrupt them so you don't get stunned, and keep everyone nice and healthy. Lots of stuns and interrupts here is really good, because these guys, anything they cast is just horrible. But really, it just doesn't do anything extra than on Heroic, which is probably the thing that I'm the most disappointed about, is the fact that these guys don't have any kind of extra mechanic. Moving on now to Rolar. Now, this is a pretty intensive fight on Heroic, especially if you're undergeared. I know that when I first started doing this on Warlords of Draenor, we struggled on this fight, especially DPS-wise, which makes me think that he needs a little bit more health on Mythic. Now, the health pools on Mythic are fairly large. Some enemies take a fair amount of time to kill, but really, I think that they could be tuned up a little bit more, especially this guy. It might just be us. I didn't have a DPS meter active because it's the PTR, a lot of add-ons didn't work, and I didn't want to jeopardize my recording in any kind of way. But I felt like we killed him fairly quickly. We only had one wave of fire, so we weren't really jeopardized in any kind of way. But I have had a little idea for what might make this fight a mythic fight. What could happen is that when Rolar summons his first boulder, he could maybe do something to it that like hardens it or something so that it stops in the middle of the bridge. Like, it just stops, and it would just be there as a physical object, blocking line of sight, and maybe you have to target it and kill it or something, but the whole idea is that when he next uses his next wave of boulders, if a boulder hits that other one, like, maybe they explode and deal a whole bunch of damage to everyone or something, so that could be kind of a cool little extra mechanic you could add, be it having to actually target the rock and, like, knock it off the side or something, or destroy it, or just healing through the damage that it causes. Now moving on, you have these Bloodmaul Ogron. They hit fairly hard. The tank did get chunked a couple of times, but that's not too much of a big deal. They also have the knockback, which rather hilariously did kill the tank at one point by getting knocked into the lava, which was quite funny, but that wasn't too much of a big deal. We were able to pick that up and keep everyone alive. Really, I wouldn't add anything to these guys. They do a lot of group damage, so it's not too much of a big deal. And as long as you don't tank them near the edges of these lava pools, you'll be just fine. Moving on now to these flame speakers, I don't think there's too much to be added to these guys. They have an exploding flame and a channel flame. Both of them deal okay damage. I like to see them do a little bit more damage and necessitate a bit of CC before the last boss, but really that's not too much of a big deal. I think these guys are okay, and actually I think they would be great in the last fight, which we will get onto now. Now the fight with Gog'ethh, when Warlords of Draenor first released, was actually pretty intensive. He's a fairly nasty guy with a lot of different mechanics, and he puts a lot of fire on the floor, and he summons a lot of adds and things like that that can do a lot of damage to the group. But really, we may have been overgeared for this guy, but we killed him fairly quickly. Again, I'd like to see a little bit more health on him. But there are a couple of mechanics I'd like to see added to this. So my first idea was to actually have this add that he summons, this unstable slag, the fire line that it creates between itself and the forge that it's trying to move to. I think it would be cool if that dealt damage, so that it actually cornered off a little section of the room. Maybe it could have 2 or even 3 fire lines, which means that you'd have to consider where you're standing and kill it really quickly, so that you can basically free yourself up with more room in the fight. So I think that would be a nice little addition to it. Additionally, I think it would be cool to do something with the fire on the ground. Really, it's not too much of a big deal unless your DPS is very low. I think it might be kind of cool though if that it did something else, like maybe it followed you around, or it just did something other than just sit there. It would be cool if maybe he overcharges one of them, making it expand in size to like temporarily maybe, just to give you something else to think about during the fight. And finally, one other thing that I think would be cool with this guy is make him summon a new kind of ad. Make him summon the Bloodmaul flame speakers from the trash pack before him. They could be an interesting addition to the fight. Maybe they wouldn't like actually target anyone. They could just like spam that channel flames and just kind of move in different kind of directions and stuff, just to make things interesting. And you could kill them to free up more room in the fight and things like that. So that might be kind of cool. So that concludes my thoughts on the mythic version of the Bloodmaul Slag Mines. I didn't really struggle here too much. We never wiped, and I think the fact that it's just heroic abilities right now with higher numbers isn't really that much of a big deal. It makes it kind of easy, and all of the stuff that drops from here is item level 630. I'm assuming that that's going to be higher, and I'm assuming it's only temporary, but it seems to be using the same names and animations and all that stuff from the original items. So it might be kind of cool to add a few new items, but maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm pretty sure they won't remain as item level 630 though. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.